She said it was a surprise for Mother's Day. Something peaceful. Just us two, little getaway to make new memories. I didn't question it, not once. The ride was quiet, but not in the way you enjoy. It was the kind of quiet where every word feels too heavy to say, and every smile looks like it's hiding something. I looked out the window and tried to enjoy the view, even though my hands wouldn't stop fidgeting with the edge of my sweater. The sky was soft with clouds, but the air in that car felt thick. She kept glancing at me, then back at the road, like she was checking if I was still paying attention. I asked her where we were going, and she just said, "You'll love it." But her voice had a crack in it, a little tremble like she was saying more than she let on. I've known her voice since before she knew her own name. I can tell when something's off, and something was off. I didn't say anything though. I just smiled and nodded. That's what you do when you start feeling like a guest in your own life. Thank you for being here, truly. I don't take it lightly, knowing someone chose to sit with me for a while and listen. If you've ever felt like you were just taking up space in someone else's world, like your kindness was forgotten, or your love turned into a burden, then maybe, just maybe, this story might feel a little like yours too. There's a certain kind of strength that comes with being quiet for so long, with holding your tongue when you could have screamed, with remembering things others hope you'll forget. If any part of this reaches you, I'd be honored to know where you're watching from. Just drop it in the comments. And if you've walked through anything like this, tell your truth. Sometimes saying it out loud is the beginning of healing. I raised her with everything I had, even when I had nothing left for myself. I still remember the nights I stayed up sewing her school clothes by hand, then waking up just a few hours later to fix her lunch and walk her to the bus stop. I never minded the work, not once, because her smile made it all worth it. We used to sit on the floor with puzzles, laughing about the silliest things, and when storms rolled in, she'd crawl beside me and say she wasn't scared, but I could feel her little hand gripping mine, just tight enough to say otherwise. There were birthdays I made magic out of flour and coupons, and she never seemed to notice we didn't have much. I wanted her to grow up proud, strong, and kind, and for the longest time, I thought she had. She was bright, thoughtful, always careful with her words, always watching, always knowing just how to make someone feel seen. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The calls came further apart. The visits got shorter. One birthday she said she was busy, and the next she forgot entirely. She started talking to me like I was a task she had to manage, like asking how I was became another thing to tick off her list. It's strange how you can feel someone slipping before they even say a word. It starts with a pause that lasts a little too long, a tone that turns from warmth to cool politeness, a hug that's just a tap on the back. And you tell yourself not to take it personally, but when it's the same person you once held through every fever and fear, it feels like something deeper is breaking. We pulled into that small train station just past the edge of town. The kind of place that looks like time forgot it. The pavement was cracked. The bench looked like it hadn't been sat on in years, and the only sound around us was the wind, pushing loose gravel across the ground. She parked the car and smiled like it was all part of the plan. I asked her again, "Where exactly are we going?" And she just laughed a little, touched my shoulder, and said, "Let me grab us both a coffee. You just sit and rest for a minute." I nodded, thinking maybe she needed a moment to herself too. Maybe she was just trying to make the day feel special in her own way. I watched her walk away, the car keys still in her hand. I didn't think much of it at first. I sat down on that cold metal bench, pulling my sweater tighter around me. I reached into my purse for my phone, and that's when I realized my purse wasn't there. Neither was my phone. She must have taken them with her by mistake, I told myself. She probably meant to come right back. But the minutes kept stretching. 10 passed, then 20, and the sun started moving across the sky like it had somewhere better to be. The wind picked up, biting through my sleeves. I looked around, hoping maybe someone else was nearby, someone who could help. But the platform was empty, completely. It was just me. Sitting there with no coat, no bag, no way to call anyone. My hands started to tremble, not from fear exactly, but from the quiet weight of confusion. Then I heard it. A voice carried on the wind. Not hers, but close enough. I turned just slightly and caught sight of her standing by the corner of the building, her back half turned, holding her phone to her ear. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help but hear the words that slipped out so casually. "Let's see if she's still sharp," she said, like it was nothing. Then she laughed, light as air, and added, "If not, I'll take over everything." My stomach dropped. That laugh didn't belong to the girl I raised. That tone didn't come from the child I stayed up all night rocking when she was sick. That was someone else speaking now, and I realized I wasn't waiting for coffee. I was being left. On purpose. Not for the first time in my life, but this time, it was colder than I ever thought it would be. My hands were shaking, not from age, not from the breeze slipping through that thin sweater, but from the sudden knowing that I had just been left on purpose by the one person I thought would never do such a thing. I sat still, trying not to panic, trying not to cry, trying not to give in to the lump rising in my throat. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to think, to steady myself, to remember. That's what they wanted, wasn't it? For me to forget. To sit there in confusion, to lose track of time, to feel lost, helpless, small. But I didn't feel lost, and I wasn't confused. I was hurt, deeply, quietly hurt. But my mind was sharp. Maybe not as fast as it once was, but sharp in all the places that mattered. I sat there, breathing slow, listening to the wind, the distant hum of cars from the highway, the way my shoes barely touched the ground from that low bench, and I thought of him. My husband. Gone for years now, but never really gone. He had this way of speaking when something was serious, when it was more than just words. And one day, not long before he passed, he took my hand and said, "If something ever happens to me, and if someone ever comes for what's ours, call Thomas, he'll know what to do." I didn't ask questions that day. I just nodded, because I trusted him, like I always did. And Thomas, well, that was a name I hadn't spoken out loud in over 20 years. But in that moment, sitting alone on that bench, I could see it clear as day. I remembered the way he wrote it down, neat and slow, just once, folded inside an envelope tucked into the back of our old address book. Not a business card, not a full address, just a name and a number, and the quiet weight of a man's last line of protection for the woman he loved. I smiled to myself just a little, because while they thought I'd fall apart, I was doing the opposite. I was putting the pieces back together. I wasn't sure if the number still worked. I wasn't sure if Thomas was even still alive. But I was sure about one thing. This was not the day I would be forgotten. Not by her, and not by the truth. His voice came back to me so clearly in that moment, like it was tucked right behind my ear all along, just waiting for the right time to whisper again. He didn't say many serious things near the end. Most days, we just sat in quiet, watching the world go by from our porch, sipping sweet tea, saying very little. But one afternoon, when the sky was heavy with the kind of gray that made everything feel important, he reached for my hand. I remember his fingers trembling, but his grip still strong, and he said, "If anyone ever tries to take what's yours, call Thomas. He'll know what to do." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He just said it once, like a man placing the last piece of a puzzle. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask who. I just nodded, because sometimes love is about trusting what you don't fully understand. I hadn't thought of that moment in years. But there I was, alone on that bench, abandoned without a coat or a phone, holding only that memory, like it was a warm blanket wrapped tight around my shoulders. I stood slowly, my knees stiff from sitting too long in the cold, but my mind steady. I scanned the station until I spotted it, tucked along the far wall near the back of the building. A payphone, faded red, chipped at the edges, but still upright like it remembered what it was made for. I walked toward it, one step after another, ignoring the ache in my legs. I opened the small flap on the side and pulled the receiver to my ear. There was a dial tone, steady and soft, and it felt like a small miracle. I reached into my pocket, not for a phone, but for something older, something stronger. A scrap of paper, worn thin, creased down the middle, with 7 numbers and a name written in my husband's hand. No area code, no title, just Thomas. I didn't know if it would still connect, if the man on the other end would even remember me, but I remembered him. And I remembered what my husband said. That was enough. My fingers moved slow but sure over the buttons, pressing each number like it mattered, like each one was a promise being honored. I held the phone close, closed my eyes and waited. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew the moment was bigger than it looked. Some people think growing older means growing weaker, but it doesn't. It means growing rooted. And I was rooted in memory, in love, in the kind of wisdom you can't fake. I didn't know what I'd hear when that line connected. But I knew I wouldn't be hearing silence. Not today. The line rang once, and my heart did something strange, like it paused just a little between beats. Then it rang again, and I felt the weight of those years since I last spoke his name. The third ring was the longest, or maybe it just felt that way, stretched out by hope and fear sitting side by side. Then I heard it. A click, soft and deliberate, followed by a voice I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime, but one I could never forget. "Mrs. Evelyn? Is that you?" His voice hadn't changed much. A little slower, maybe, but still steady. Still sure. I swallowed the knot in my throat and said, "Yes, Thomas, it's time." I didn't have to explain. He didn't ask who I was talking about, or why I was calling from a payphone, or what exactly had gone wrong. He just paused for half a breath and said, "I'll be there before dark." That was it. No back and forth. No confusion. Just a man keeping a promise he'd made years ago to someone he respected. I hung up the phone and rested my hand on the side of the booth for a moment, grounding myself. The wind had picked up, and the shadows were starting to stretch long across the concrete. I walked back to the bench, still slow, still stiff, but now holding something different inside me. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't shaking. I was waiting. And not the kind of waiting that breaks a person down, but the kind that builds a person back up. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, eyes on the road, watching for headlights in the distance. Not broken, not beaten, just quiet, just ready. Because when someone leaves you thinking you'll fall apart, there's something powerful in simply holding yourself together. And I did. I held. I waited. And for the first time that day, I felt like I wasn't the only one remembering. It was exactly 7 days later when she came back, and I knew it before I even looked through the window. Some things you feel before you see them. The sound of a car pulling into the drive, a little too fast. The way the gravel crackled beneath the tires. That overly light knock, the kind that pretends to be polite but really just wants to move things along. I stood still for a moment, looking down at the floor, taking a breath, feeling my own pulse like a quiet drumbeat in my chest. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. When I opened the door, there she was. Dressed sharp, lips painted, hair pulled back just enough to say she meant business. And behind her stood a man I'd never seen before, holding a clipboard thick with papers and a pen already in hand, like the ending was already written and all I had to do was sign. She smiled at me, warm on the surface, cold underneath. "It's just a little paperwork, Mama," she said, stepping forward as if she still had the right. "Just to help you with things, since you've been forgetting a lot lately." She looked past me into the house, like she expected it to already be hers. Like she had rehearsed the whole conversation and just needed me to nod, to say yes, to hand over my name and everything attached to it. I didn't flinch. I didn't move out of her way. I just let the silence stretch long enough for her smile to start slipping. She held the pen like it was a gift, like it was kindness. But I've held enough broken things in my life to know what danger looks like when it wears perfume. I didn't reach for the clipboard. I didn't ask what was on it. I turned instead, calm and slow, and walked further into the house, leaving the door open just wide enough for her to follow if she dared. I knew she would. She's not the type to leave a story half-finished. And what she didn't know, what she never expected, was that she wasn't walking into the ending she had planned. She was walking into mine. She followed me inside like it was still her home, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't left me on that empty platform with nothing but a sweater and the sound of her voice echoing in my memory. Her heels clicked across the floor with purpose, and the man behind her, tall, clean-cut, clipboard in hand, he stayed close, eyes already scanning the room like he was taking inventory. But what she didn't notice right away was the man standing quietly near the far end of the room. Older now, silver at his temples, but standing tall, just like he always did. Thomas. He didn't say a word when she walked in. He didn't need to. He stood like a man with answers, like someone who had seen more than he'd ever say out loud. And next to him, sitting calmly in the corner chair, was another man, younger, but sharp-eyed, with a folder resting neatly in his lap. The kind of man who notices what others hope to hide. She stopped mid-step, and I watched it register. Not panic, not yet, just confusion. A tiny falter in her confident stride. Her eyes shifted from the men to me, searching for explanation. That's when I turned to her, slow and measured, and said, "You came to take over? Then let's all take a look at what you've done." Her mouth opened like she wanted to laugh, like it was still a game, like I was making a fuss over nothing. But then Thomas nodded to the man beside him, and that folder came open with quiet precision. The investigator didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply started laying out what he'd gathered. Bank statements showing withdrawals I never made, documents she'd drafted without my knowledge, conversations recorded from a phone she didn't know was being watched. Every page turned felt like another stone lifted. Another truth pulled from the shadows. She didn't speak, not right away. Her fingers tightened around the pen she still held, the one she brought to finish what she started. I stepped aside then, gave her a full view of the room, of the men she never expected to see, of the truth she thought would stay buried under my silence. And in that moment, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't confused. I wasn't someone waiting to be signed away. I was a woman standing in her own home, with her own name, backed by people who remembered the value of a promise. The folder didn't lie. It never does when the truth has been gathered with patience. Page after page, line after line, all there in black and white. Transfers I never approved, transactions I never touched, accounts opened in my name with addresses I'd never lived at. It was all there, laid out like a story she thought would stay buried under the dust of my age. But what she didn't count on was that while she was watching me for signs of forgetting, I was remembering everything. I stood there, watching her face as Thomas read the numbers aloud, not loud, not angry, just steady like a man who's done this before. The investigator added his notes, explaining the emails she sent to herself from my name, the signature she tried to mimic, the calls she placed when she thought I was asleep in the other room. And as her face began to shift, not from guilt but from exposure, I finally spoke. Calm. Low. Clear. "You forgot I was watching. You forgot I remembered things you hoped I'd let go of." Her eyes widened just slightly, but she still said nothing. I could see her brain working, trying to measure the damage, trying to spin a story out of the unraveling. But there was no story left to tell that hadn't already been printed, recorded, documented by men who don't forget what they're paid to protect. She had been planning this for months, maybe longer. Building the lie in pieces, counting on the fact that I'd be too tired, too trusting, too old to catch it. But what she forgot is that the same woman who used to sew dresses by candlelight and balance a checkbook to the penny didn't lose that part of herself just because her hands got slower. She forgot that I had been quiet, not blind. That silence is not the same as weakness. That memory doesn't have to shout to be sharp. And as the room stayed still, as the evidence kept unfolding like the petals of a long-closed bloom, I saw it. Clear as day, that moment when her story no longer worked. And I stood there, holding nothing but my breath and my backbone, watching the truth take its rightful place between us. I didn't yell. There was no need. I didn't cry either, though my eyes had every reason to. There's a kind of strength that comes from quiet knowing, from watching someone dig a hole and realizing you no longer need to stop them. You just step aside and let the truth catch up. I walked to the table where the documents were already waiting. Not the ones she brought, not the lies hidden under soft language and friendly fonts, but the ones my lawyer prepared the moment Thomas picked up the phone. Real papers with real protections, written by people who didn't see me as fragile, but as someone worth standing beside. I picked up the pen, the one she thought she'd used to take everything from me, and I signed the power of attorney, my name, my choice, my terms. I froze my accounts. I secured the deed. I made sure that every single thing I had built, saved, and guarded with the quiet labor of my life would never fall into the hands of someone who saw me as an obstacle instead of a mother. Then I opened the will. The old one, the one written with love before time, revealed motives I never wanted to believe. I crossed out what no longer belonged. And in its place, I rewrote names. Not out of revenge, but out of clarity. The ones who showed up. The ones who called without asking for anything. The ones who came not to test my mind, but to bring peace to it. That's who I wrote in. She watched from across the room, frozen now in a way my accounts would never be again. Lips parted but no words finding their way out. That voice she always used to charm her way into things, it didn't work here anymore. Not in a room where the truth had already been named and documented. I looked at her then, not with anger, but with something firmer, certainty. And I said, just loud enough for her and no one else, "You tested my mind. You failed the test." She blinked, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't seen in her in a long while. Not regret, not sorrow, but realization. That I hadn't forgotten. That I wasn't as alone as she thought. That the past she tried to erase had already written the ending, and it didn't include her signature. I placed the pen down softly and closed the folder. My hands didn't tremble, my voice didn't shake. I didn't need to prove anything. I had already protected everything that mattered. That evening, when the house was finally quiet again, I walked over to my chair, the one by the window, and sat down slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every bit of the stillness I had earned. The door was locked now, not out of fear, but out of choice. I sat there, fingers resting on the armrests, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the road. That kind of silence is different when it's yours. It doesn't feel empty, it feels honest. I looked at the table beside me, where my phone was plugged in, fully charged, not forgotten, not hidden. I picked it up and opened the contacts, scrolling slowly. I deleted the names I no longer needed, those who hadn't called in months, those who only reached out when they needed something, those who looked at me like a problem instead of a person. And I added new ones. My neighbor, who checks in just to ask how the roses are doing. The young nurse from the clinic, who once sat with me past her shift just to talk about gardening. My lawyer, who didn't speak to me like I was a case, but like I was someone's mother. I changed the emergency contact list, not out of spite, but to protect the peace I'd rebuilt. Then I stood, slow and steady, walked into the kitchen, and started making dinner. Just something simple: grits, eggs, and a piece of cornbread from the freezer. The kind of meal I used to make when life was harder, but love was still close. I set the table for one. No silence, no sadness, just warmth and breath and the soft clink of my fork on the plate. I took my time eating. I wasn't rushing through anything anymore. I may forget a grocery item. I may misplace my glasses or call the dog by the wrong name when I'm half asleep. But I didn't forget the years I gave you. The mornings I skipped breakfast so you could have lunch. The nights I stayed awake just to listen to the sound of your breathing. The birthday gifts I bought with coins. The school meetings I showed up for even when I was exhausted. And I won't forget how you repaid me. Not with honesty, not with care, but with a test I never asked to take. And while you were busy measuring what you thought I was losing, I was quietly preserving everything I still had. My memory, my will, my worth. This home doesn't hold lies anymore. Just me, and the truth, and the peace that comes from knowing I still know who I am. They left me at that train station to see if I'd lose my mind. But they forgot. I raised them with it. Every lesson, every sacrifice, every quiet night I stayed up for their peace came from the very mind they tried to question. If someone you trusted ever tested your strength, tried to take what was already yours, or made you feel like you were fading, tell your story. Say it out loud. Right here. You're not weak, you're not small, and you are not forgettable. If this story felt familiar, tell me where you're watching from. Share what you've carried in silence. Subscribe and stay close. There's more to come, and you'll always have a place here with me. Thank you for watching.